All right, I think we're live. Welcome to this live stream that I'm doing today on why feminists don't understand oppression. Yes, I know that's kind of a somewhat clickbaity title, but it seems like, I don't know, lately all of a sudden feminism is on my mind again. And I've been talking about it a lot with several different individuals in several different spheres. So I thought that I would come on here and talk about it just a little bit. I know this time isn't always the best. A lot of people are maybe picking their kids up from school or what have you. But if not, you can always come back and watch this episode. I will leave it here and I will publish it on my podcast as well if you weren't able to make it. But thanks for anyone who does take some time to listen to this. So let's get started. Because even if you can't listen to it now, I'm sure you will want to listen to it later because I have a lot of really great content in this episode. But first of all, if you are listening, please hit the subscribe button, hit the bell, make sure you get notified when I publish content, and make sure you find me over on whatever podcasting platform you like. So I'm on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, pretty much anything you can find me. So let's get started. The reason this is on my mind, first it was generated or I thought about it again. I don't always think about feminism. I mean, it's always kind of there because we're inoculated. Like, it's just everywhere. And we have been raised to be totally inoculated to this really pervasive ideology. And I think women, especially even Christian women, unwittingly hold feminist views without realizing it, or even thinking that maybe they should be some kind of a feminist, like a pro-life feminist. I used to identify as a pro-life feminist. So the reason I think this is really important, hey, Jason, thanks for joining. I love to see it. You're going to like this one. So anyway, I was on Twitter. I know, Twitter, the hellhole that Twitter is. And I happened to come across this Twitter thread, and I will make sure that I read it off to you. But first, I think it's important to talk about, why did feminism take root to begin with? And a lot of people sort of, we've been raised in this environment where feminism has sort of kind of ruled the roost. Like, women are, girl bosses, they're taking over. The future is female kind of a mentality. And where did this come from? Because this is, it's not super new. I mean, there are movements of it throughout the course of time, but really, how did it kind of gain such a strong root system here in the West? And the answer to that is communism. Most people don't realize that communism really pushed feminism to a new level. And and I was thinking about this, and I thought, wow, communism is kind of like that snake in the garden, right? It has all these promises, and it's sort of it's the snake that tells us that we can have it all. We deserve to have all the power, all the knowledge. We are entitled to these things. And Eve was the first to take the bait, right? And then Adam stood by and then did whatever Eve told him to do, instead of stepping in as a provider and a protector and saying, hey, no, this is like the one thing God told us not to do. He gave us everything. And the one thing he told us not to do was to eat of the fruit of the tree of good and evil. And he should have stopped Eve, and he should have stepped in. And he did not. He was a beta male. The first beta male we saw was Adam. And Eve really was the first feminist. And communism was the vehicle through which feminism really took root and sowed discontentment among women. And what eventually happened was that, and we see this within communism, one of the goals of communism was to get women out of the home, to divorce them from the family, divorce families, to lower the rate of through which women would have children, population control, all these things. Hey, Mac of the ages, love to see ya. But a lot of people don't understand that feminism really was born out of the side of communism through this snake. And so with that, you have this movement sowing discontentment among women, and women buying it and then going into the workforce, leaving other people to raise their children, and being further cut off from that family unit. The breakdown of the family stems from communism. That's why Our Lady has always been so vehement in her imploring us to pray against communism. We see it with Our Lady of Fatima. So anyway, that's a big component of it. And the Cold War really kind of thrust this out into the kind of expedited this, because women suddenly were having to go into the workforce in mass because their husbands were at war. And suddenly women are working outside the home and their children are not necessarily a priority. And so it continued to perpetuate this idea that women need to be in the workforce. Not only that, but it totally restructured our economy. Now you have an economy that requires women in the workforce, because now, and this is just the nerdy, I guess, economic part of it, but I mean, if you think about it as basic economics, you have more people in the workforce, you have more people you can tax, you have lower wages, which then reinforces the need for women to stay in the workforce because they can no longer go home. They need to work on two incomes. And so, then you have women being told, and then it kind of coalesces with the sexual revolution, right? In order for women to be in the workforce, especially workforce in mass, they have to embrace things like contraception and abortion. And pro-life feminists will not admit this, but you don't have women in the workforce without abortion. You can't keep working if you keep having kids. It's not really a viable option because daycare is exorbitantly expensive, and at the same time, you need multiple incomes because of the way we've restructured the economy. You need two incomes to sustain a household. So, I mean, it's like all of these things are coercing women to maintain in the workforce. So you might as well just embrace it, right? Like that's exactly what communism and the Cold War and all these things and feminism really pushed. And yes, Jason, that's exactly it. Look, she treads where she pleases, all right? And we do need to put ourselves under Our Lady's mantle. Her immaculate heart will absolutely prevail. Hey, Connor, thanks for joining. And Margot. Margot, perfect example too. Like, if you can't find a husband, then you also have to work, right? Like, it's not the way it has been over time, where women were getting married pretty young and being married off, and their family was paying a dowry, all these things, but it was understood that the husband was going to provide for her, right? And for their children, because that is a natural end of the marital act, is children. And so the whole incessant need to divorce children and marriage and break down the family so that women can pretend like they are living fulfilling lives in the workforce. And I'm not saying that there aren't women out there that have fulfilling lives in the workforce. What I am saying is that it is more proper to the nature of women, especially young women who are having children and are of childbearing age, especially with, again, I need to repeat it, young children. It is more proper to them that they are home with their children. And that doesn't mean they can't have other hobbies. I mean, hello, look at me. Like, obviously, I'm okay with women having a role in the public sphere. And I think, too, this is important. What I want to add to this, feminists and oppression, is that there is some level of oppression. Part of the reason feminism really took hold was because there are segments of men in with the traditional mindset that think women should not be involved in a meaningful way in the public discourse. I encounter it all the time. I just did the other day. Somebody said that the world would be a better place, commented on one of my threads. Yeah, can you see the baby? She is rolling around back there. She's having a good time. But I mean, people tell me all the time that, or I shouldn't say all the time. That's overstating it. But it's not uncommon for me to hear from very, very traditional men, like on the far extreme side of traditionalism, to believe that women shouldn't have a voice in the public discourse. And why is that? It just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, I could also argue that, like, Saint Joseph, he was silent, so men should be silent. No. And aside, Mac, no, I don't play guitar. I've had these guitars since I was in high school, and I would love to learn how to play them, but I don't. I wish I did. So anyway, but no, I think women, we need to have a voice. I think, and I think there are plenty of others that would agree with me, but often women help humanize men. Even or not Saint, Alice von Hildebrand talks about this, just the differences in our nature. Um, and, part of the thing about women is that we have this ability to help men be more human, because men can so easily compartmentalize things and women can't. Like, we can, but it's not necessarily proper to our nature, or it's not the norm for women to really be able to compartmentalize things. We take into account a lot of different factors, and sometimes it can be a good thing, and when it's disordered, you see this high emotionalism that women express, where they're totally irrational, and they kind of get that they sort of fall into exactly the stereotype of a hysterical woman, and that's very common amongst feminists. We see it really in vogue, and it's very common amongst the right too. I mean, there are certainly plenty of women there who sort of have abandoned the use of their intellect and are sort of existing on their emotions. So it is on both sides, but you see it very prominently in liberalism with the screaming and the emotional euphemistic language that's always supercharged towards affecting a certain end, and that end is usually disconnecting women from her children and acting as if every single thing that a man does is somehow oppressive. um, so I just wanted to talk about that today. And there is, like I said, there is some parts of traditional Catholicism that does like to silence women, that does believe women should just be at home tending to the children, and they have no they're not allowed to use their gifts outside of that. They're not allowed to teach, even though nuns were teaching in schools forever. Women have always used their gift to instruct. It's a part of our nature. That's what we do. That's why we homeschool. Those are all that's a proper use of our gifts, and so is being out in the public sphere. Anyway, I will be talking about this more over on the meaning of Catholic. That's an episode we're going to talk about. But I wanted to talk about, why did feminism take root, and how do we see it? So the thing about today that I also wanted to touch on is that you see two paradigms that are coexisting completely paradoxically, because we can create our own virtual echo chambers. And so that's why, sometimes if you talk to somebody who really lives and breathes this sociological construct of women just constantly being oppressed by men, anytime a man looks at her, that's oppressive. And maybe I'm being slightly hyperbolic, but sometimes it really feels that way when you engage these women, and even these feminist men, as they like to call themselves. And then you have other people who are looking at how women are made and how we have been designed, and two, kind of going back to that Adam and Eve, and communism being kind of the snake. The snake really encouraged Adam and Eve to make themselves into gods, right? They wanted to be like gods of their own, and you see that in feminism, this desire to take power and to control her body in a way that only God controls nature, right? And so that's a part of the occult, that is a part of feminism, and that's why it's so antagonistic towards Christianity. And so we can live in these completely different paradigms, and yet we still have to live amongst each other. It's the weirdest thing, because there's no sense of reality, and that's kind of what happens when everything is so relative, right? When people on the left argue that relativism is a perfectly okay state of existence, but at the same time you say, I like being a stay-at-home mom, I like serving my husband, I enjoy that, I think it's fulfilling, then they think you're oppressed. It's like, well, what about my truth? I thought this was about my truth. And so what it really tells you is that they do believe that there is an absolute truth. They just believe that their absolute truth is the correct version of that, even though it doesn't comport with reality and it doesn't comport with nature. So I'll read this Twitter thread then, and I'll dive into this a little bit more. So I won't even bother mentioning who wrote it, because it's whatever. If I told you there was a way, I retweeted it, so if you wanted, you can go back and look through my feed. But they wrote, if I told you There was a way you'd never have to work again, but you'd be completely financially dependent on a roommate who would expect you to provide sex and 100% of the domestic labor, and that any spending money you got was under their control. You'd say, that's a job. You'd also point out that it's a shitty job. You have no protections against sexual assault by your roommate because all sex is covered by the contract. The wage is not set. They can give or withhold your allowance depending on whether or not they like your work. The hours are 24/7. If I told you that it would also be very difficult to impossible to quit that job without spending a lot of money and proving a very specific claims in court, you'd run. Before I even tell you that your roommate can impregnate you at will and will make you care for the kid. Put that shit in some red lipstick and a poofy skirt, and that's tradwifery. It's romantic. It's nostalgic. I would just ask you whether, if you knew the terms going in, you wouldn't take any other job before you took that one. And right now I'm looking at it. This thing has over 10,000. It has almost 11,000 likes and 1,099 retweets. If that doesn't tell you about the state of where we are right now, I don't really know what else does. It's absolutely asinine. And this is why I wanted to talk about why feminism is actually oppressive, because you know what? Denying people the truth is, and actually encouraging them to believe things that are not true is oppressive. Denying people reality is oppressive. Forcing them to live in an environment that rejects our very nature and forces people to pretend like we have no nature, that our nature can be like configured however we want, even though it's just not a biological or physiological reality, that's oppressive. And because we deserve the truth. We were created for truth. Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. And when you step outside of that paradigm, sure, feminism and relativism, that sure makes a lot of sense. But if you exist with the understanding that we were created and we are not mere creators, we don't get to create every aspect of our humanity and our own nature. We don't get to create our own nature. It's a part of our dignity. It's a part of our nature, our essence. We have to reject this thinking. We have to reject it in all the ways that it comes up in our own lives. Like, I can't tell you how often I talk to women and they really feel like they will not meet their potential if they aren't in the workforce. Why is that? I mean, I felt that way too when I stopped working to stay home with my children. I thought, am I not meeting my potential? And the real question we need to be asking is, what is our legacy? G.K. Chesterton talks about this, in reference to women wanting to be work for their bosses, but refusing to be quote unquote slaves for their spouses. And in reality, you're a slave to your boss and you should be serving your family. Like, why is one slavery and the other one's not? Why would you want to work and slave away in an office for a man that you have no lifelong commitment to, who is really ready to replace you at a given moment and is able to, than to your husband and to the people that you are not, they can't replace you. You are uniquely theirs. You're part of their family unit. And the thing that's so interesting too about this stupid Twitter thread is that it totally denies, it pretends like, first of all men are evil, which is so by the book of these really extreme feminists. They pretend that like every man is like this and that marriage is like this. Like, well, proper marriage is not, but why are we? So then the question really isn't, is marriage bad? It's like, as an institution, it's been around since the dawn of time. But what is it that is so perverted right now? Why does she believe that this is what every marriage is like? Why are there instances of abuse? I mean, go back to my domestic violence episode. Let's talk about it. Because it certainly exists, but it's not every marriage, and it's not every traditional marriage. I'm a tradwife, I guess, if I love to serve my husband, if I want to teach my children at home. It's so funny because even like Alice von Hildebrand, I'll bring her up again, but unwittingly she says, the feminists acknowledge the superiority of the male sex by wishing to become like men, right? They want to reject their femininity. And the pinnacle of femininity is our ability to nurture and bring forth life. That is the distinguishing factor of being a woman. And if you completely wholesale reject that, you are de facto wanting to be more like men. Because there's no other option. We do live in a binary, despite what anyone else wants to say or delude themselves in. We live in a binary. And she goes on to say that the world in which we now live is a world whose outlook is so distorted that we absolutize what is relative, like I said before, like money making, power, success, and relativize what is absolute, like the truth, moral values, and God. She writes these things in her book, The Privilege of Being a Woman, which is absolutely incredible. But I want to bring it back to the question: if the truth is relative, why can't I choose to be at home? Why is that suddenly oppressive? And why would you assume that my husband doesn't work his tail off for me and my family every day? It's not easy to work and live on a single income, and we choose to do it when we make sacrifices, but we sacrifice for each other because we are a team. And he is our head. I defer to him, but he is always taking in my input. He's not a dictator in my home. He is a servant. He needs a servant leader. And this is like the proper understanding of Christian marriage. And so when you see these women who are insisting that tradwifery is somehow a version of being oppressed or something, they don't understand the nature of an authentic marriage. That's what it comes down to. They really believe it's a contract, and not a covenant in which your job, your legacy lies in you leading these souls to heaven in your family. That is your job. And so what I wanted to say is, what is the eternal perspective? Because what I think is oppressive is living in a society that elevates male attributes and rejects the feminine, where women are encouraged to leave their children in the care of others so that they can meet their potential, as if motherhood is not the fullest expression of femininity. I might have to go get Veronica. She's tangled up in cords and all kinds of stuff. 1 second. There we go. And see, this is motherhood, right? So what I also find oppressive is that, and people will use the example of like women who struggle to get pregnant. And it's just so dishonest because we recognize that it's a great loss for a woman if she's unable to have children. And as such, these really sad situations actually bolster the case that childbearing and rearing is uniquely a feminine experience and something that is incredibly powerful, transformative, and necessary for our society. So I also think it's oppressive that the government relies on families to buy into this nonsense at the expense of our families to perpetuate the need for a two-income household. I will reiterate that. It's oppressive to tell men that protecting and providing for their wives and children is innately evil. Like, why are we giving men this idea that like authentic, real masculinity, where they do the things that they are properly ordered towards and disposed towards, is somehow oppressive to women? Like, why would I want a man? Why would I want a guy who does not want to serve me and my family that way so I can serve our family? Why would I want to live a double life where I'm constantly trying to keep up? And that's the thing, is like, feminism says you can have it all, but the reality is you can't. If you're working and a mom, just like anything else in life, you have to make tough choices. That's life. And you can choose to send your child to a school or to daycare or what have you so you can work outside the home. You're allowed to do that. But you're making choices. You can't have it all. You don't get to be the lovely stay-at-home wife who's like baking bread and teaching your children homeschooling and stuff, and then going and leaving your house, and you just get to be this really stellar employee that never misses work or anything else. There are consequences for our choices. So I just don't understand the need to push this idea that women should wholesale be out there working. To be home is oppressive, because that's not my idea of oppressive. Is like being told I have to do all of this stuff and like do it perfectly. It's also oppressive, in my opinion, and just bad for society. To tell children that the divorce is resulting in the tension that arises between men and women who are defined by, because here's what we see. We see men and women in this feministic culture that is they are defined by their own self-interest, their own advancement, their own egos, and their sheer individualism. And the children are the ones that suffer, right? And we tell them that they're better off with these gaping wounds in their lives with very little recourse towards healing. It's oppressive to me that we would force children to sit in a school all day, suffering at the hands of liberal ideologues who wish to pick at the innate and most fundamental understanding of themselves, to pick at their nature and to confuse them. You're sowing confusion. And again, like I said at the beginning, we deserve the truth. Okay, it is a part of something we deserve as human beings, and we seek it out, right? Because our God is a God of truth. It's oppressive that women are now competing against men for privacy, for safety in their own spaces. What's the point of feminism or anything else if you're not actually fighting for women and if you're allowing men to pretend that they're women too? And I also think, lastly, that it's oppressive to deny women an opportunity to live life in the fullest expression of their femininity by insult, coercion, or outright denial that she has a right to remain at home serving her family. That is oppression. Feminism is oppressive, and not remaining at I want to make it really clear. Remaining at home to love your husband and children is not oppressive. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this short little live stream. Please like this, share it, subscribe, and find me on my podcast. If you enjoyed this and would like to see more content, let me know. Comment in the box after I close the broadcast. And yeah, everyone's loving Veronica. Hey, you've got fans. But thanks again. God bless each and every one of you, and long live the patriarchy, I guess.